Welcome back to the deep dive. We're doing something a little different today. Usually we're looking at hard data or history or business strategy, but today we're looking at the history of reality itself, or at least a very specific and very strange slice of it.
It's definitely a departure from the norm, but if you look at the source material we have today, it's actually presented with a surprising amount of rigor. We aren't just talking about ghost stories here.
No, and that's the vibe I really want to set right away. I want you to picture this. It's 1966. We are in Elmira, New York. It's the middle of summer. It's humid. The windows are open because there's no AC. You have this couple, Rob and Jane. They're artists. They're struggling to pay bills. They're worried about parking tickets. And in the middle of this totally mundane domestic life, the wife, Jane, goes into a trance and starts dictating the mechanics of how the universe is built.
It is that exact contrast, the mundane domestic life versus the cosmic, that really defines our source material today, which is the early sessions book 6 of the Seth Material.
Exactly. We are covering the sessions from March 9, 1966 to August 24, 1966. This covers sessions 240 through 280. And before we get into the heavy metaphysics, and we're going to talk about time distortion and matter as energy and all of that, I need to make our standard declaration. I declare this podcast will be distributed free of charge on all major platforms for educational purposes.
Important to get that out of the way, because the mission today is to look at this specific window of time where the Seth personality, the entity that Jane is channeling, is doing two distinct things at once. On one track, he's teaching them high-level philosophy about the nature of the soul and reality. But on the second track, he is running them through a boot camp. He's actively testing them.
Right, we're talking about the envelope experiment.
It's the envelope experiment. This is the part of book 6 that I think is most fascinating for someone who might be a bit of a skeptic, because Rob, Jane's husband, he wasn't just taking this on blind faith. He wanted proof. He wanted actual data.
I want to drill down on this because when I read the source text, I was honestly surprised by how unmystical the setup was. I think when people hear psychic experiment, they immediately picture tarot cards or crystals or dim lighting. Rob was using literally just junk from his desk.
He really was. And that is exactly what makes it valid. If you use a mystical object, your brain leans on archetypes. But if you use a bill from the electric company, well, that's highly specific.
So walk us through the protocol here. How did they actually run these tests back in 1966?
It was fairly strict, actually. Rob would select an object when Jane wasn't in the room. He would usually double envelope it, so he'd seal it in one envelope and then put that inside another completely opaque envelope. He'd bring it into the session. Jane would go into a trance, and Seth, speaking through her, would have to describe what was inside.
And we aren't talking about vague guesses here, are we? It's not just some parlor trick where he says, I sensed something made of paper.
Sometimes it was vague, and we should definitely talk about the failures, too. But the hits are startlingly specific. There's a case study in session 240 that really stands out. This is the AAA card incident.
Right, the Auto Club membership card.
Yeah, so Rob puts his AAA card in the envelope. He sits down. Jane goes under, and Seth starts talking. He immediately says there is a connection with the letter M. He says there is a connection with the number 4. He identifies the shape as rectangular.
Okay, but playing devil's advocate for a second. Rectangular in paper that describes probably 90% of what you would put in an envelope. M could just mean membership? Is that really definitive proof?
If that was all it was, I would completely agree with you. It's statistically probable. But then Seth does something else. He describes, and Jane physically acts out a large, vigorous crossing out gesture. Seth says there's a mark, an X shape, a distinct cancellation on the object.
And the card inside?
The card had a very specific mark where an old date had been crossed out aggressively with a pen by Rob.
See, that is the detail that tips the scale for me. Because that's not a generic guess. That is specific to that unique physical object.
It brings up an incredibly interesting point about how this clairvoyance actually works. Seth explains later that he isn't just seeing the object with invisible X-ray eyes. He's sensing the history of the object. He's sensing the action that Rob took. The crossing out wasn't just a visual ink mark. It was an action that Rob performed. It carried a specific energy.
So he's picking up on the human event, not just the ink on the cardboard.
Precisely. And this theory of emotional charge or action energy gets even stronger when we look at the parking ticket incident. This is in session 275.
Oh, I love this one. Because it is so incredibly relatable. They went on vacation to Ithaca, right?
Right. A nice, relaxing trip to Ithaca, New York. And like many nice trips, it ended with a frustrating parking fine. Rob keeps the ticket. He puts it in the envelope.
He's really testing the limits of the cosmic forces here. Let's see if the universe can psychically identify my municipal debt.
Essentially, yeah. And Seth gets it. He picks up the number 63, which was part of the serial number on the ticket. But the phrase he uses to describe it is just brilliant. He calls it a note that was not answered.
A note that was not answered. That is remarkably poetic for a parking ticket.
It is, but it's also highly accurate. A ticket is quite literally a demand for a response. But think about the emotion attached to that. When you get a parking ticket, you feel that sudden pang. Oh no, I have to deal with this. I haven't paid this yet. That anxiety is a beacon. Seth teaches that emotions are electromagnetic realities. They scream much louder than the physical paper does.
So if Rupp had just put in a blank piece of paper that meant absolutely nothing to him, Seth might have had a much harder time reading it.
Exactly. The charge wouldn't be there. The object is just a battery holding Rob's annoyance.
That actually explains a lot about why some experiments worked beautifully and some just didn't. But speaking of things that didn't work, or at least didn't work in the way they expected them to, we have to talk about the begonia. Session 267.
The begonia. This is honestly my favorite failure in the entire book.
Why is a failure your favorite part?
Because it proves the mechanism of translation. So Rob draws a simple ink sketch of a begonia plant, just some leaves and a stem. He seals it in an envelope. Seth comes through and he is completely adamant. He says it is an eagle, or it is a bird.
Which is a complete miss. A plant is definitely not a bird.
On the binary level of right or wrong, sure, it's a miss. But Rye goes back and he really looks at his drawing. He looks at the specific way he curved the leaves of the begonia plant. And he realizes they look exactly like wings. The sweeping lines, the arch of the ink was identical to how you would draw a bird in flight.
So Seth saw the shape, but his translator, which is Jane's physical brain, categorized it wrong.
That is the working theory, yes. Seth perceived the form data. He saw the curves and the geometry. But when that raw data hit Jane's language center, her brain had to hurriedly match it to a known concept. Her brain says, curved sweeping lines, that must be a bird.
It's sort of like playing Pictionary with the telepath.
That is a great analogy. It tells us that clairvoyance isn't like watching a 4K video feed. It's much more like receiving a packet of raw code shapes, feelings, electrical impulses, and your brain has to hurriedly decode it into English words. And sometimes the decoder just guesses wrong.
And Seth was using these everyday envelope experiments to calibrate that decoder, wasn't he?
He explicitly states that these sessions were training. He was training Jane's ego to step out of the way, to stop trying to guess, and to just let the raw data flow through unedited.
Which brings us to the biggest roadblock in all of this. The thing that constantly messes up the data, the ego.
The watchdog.
Right, the watchdog ego. This concept, which comes up heavily in session 240, kind of flipped my entire understanding of the ego on its head. Because usually in spiritual or philosophical circles, the ego is the villain. It's the thing you have to suppress or kill.
Right. Ego death is always the ultimate goal in those traditions.
But Seth doesn't say that at all.
No, Seth is very pragmatic about it. He says the ego is entirely necessary. He calls it the watchdog. And the quote from the book is fascinating. He says the ego is much more dependent upon the physical self than are other portions of the personality. The ego is like a guardian who is left at home as a watchdog.
Left at home. That phrasing implies that everyone else left the building.
And according to Seth, they do. The inner self, the deeper, multidimensional part of you is constantly leaving. When you sleep, when you daydream, when you just zone out staring at the wall, the inner self wants to explore other realities. But you have this biological machine, your physical body, that needs to breathe pump blood and not walk off a cliff while you are zoned out.
So you hire a house sitter.
You hire a house sitter. That is the ego. Its entire job is to focus exclusively on physical time and space. It watches the clock. It watches the road while you drive. It makes sure the biological body survives in this specific three-dimensional reality.
So the problem isn't that we have an ego. The problem is that the house sitter eventually thinks she owns the house.
Exactly. Imagine if you went on a long vacation and your house sitter locked the doors, changed the locks, and started telling everyone, I am the only person who lives here. The owner doesn't even exist.
That is exactly what we do. We walk around thinking, I am my ego. This is all there is.
And Seth is trying to gently pry the keys out of the watchdog's hand. He's trying to tell Rob and Jane, look, the dog is a good dog. It protects the physical body. But you don't have to listen to the dog when it comes to understanding the nature of the universe. The dog only knows the backyard.
And the backyard in this analogy is physical matter, which, as we find out in session 266, isn't even really solid in the first place.
It's what he calls pseudo-matter.
Pseudo-matter. I love that term so much. It sounds like something straight out of a sci-fi novel. But this was recorded in 1966. What exactly does he mean by pseudo-matter?
He's touching on something that quantum physics was just really starting to grapple with at the time. The idea that atoms are mostly just empty space.
But Seth takes it a massive step further. He says all physical matter exists first as an idea or a mental image. So the chair I'm sitting in right now, you're saying it isn't actually a chair.
It is a field of energy that your consciousness is currently holding in the shape of a chair. Seth says we manipulate energy into patterns, we freeze energy into a form, and this is the real kicker, we use our physical senses to camouflage that energy so it looks and feels solid.
Wait, camouflage usually means hiding something so you can't see it.
In this specific case, it means hiding the true nature of the reality. If you saw the world as it truly was, just swirling energy, nonlinear time, multidimensional connections, you would be completely overwhelmed. You couldn't function at all. You couldn't sit down and eat dinner.
It would just be massive sensory overload.
Total chaos. So your physical senses act as a reducing filter. They camouflage the raw energy by painting it over with colors and textures and solidity. They make it safe and manageable for the watchdog ego to handle.
It's a user interface.
Yes,
Yeah.
perfectly stated.
It's like the icons on my computer desktop. The trash can icon isn't really a little metal trash can. It's lines of complex code. But if I had to interact with the raw binary code every single time I wanted to delete a PDF, I would never get any work done. So the operating system gives me a nice, safe picture of a trash can.
That is the perfect modern analogy for what Seth is describing. He is saying our eyes, our ears, our hands, they are building the desktop icons. They are creating pseudo-matter so we can actually play the game of physical life.
And he even cracks a joke about it. I have to quote this because it really shows his personality shining through. In session 266, he says, "The whole matter, if you will forgive my pun on matter, is highly intriguing."
You really have to appreciate a non-physical, multidimensional entity who enjoys a solid dad joke.
But tying this back to the envelope experiments, they were basically trying to hack the code.
They were trying to peek behind the desktop interface. When Jane identified the crossing out motion on the AAA card inside the sealed envelope, she wasn't looking at the desktop icon. She was accessing the underlying code. She was bypassing the physical camouflage entirely.
And that is why it is so difficult to do, because the watchdog, the ego, is hardwired to only look at the icon. It screams at you. That's a sealed envelope. You can't see through solid paper.
And Jane had to train herself to tell the watchdog, quiet down, I'm looking at the energy pattern, not the physical paper.
This perfectly leads us into one of the most complex and mind-bending ideas in Book 6, because if physical matter is just a mental construction, then time itself must be a construction too. And in segment 3, we get to the concept of non-intervals. And I have to admit, when I first read session 275, I had to read it 3 times just to grasp it.
It is incredibly dense material.
Yeah.
But once it clicks, it changes everything about how you view the present moment.
We are talking about the idea that we are literally blinking in and out of existence.
They were pulsating.
Okay, let's break this down for the listener. Seth uses the movie projector analogy to explain this.
Right. Think about how an old-school mechanical film projector works. You have a physical strip of film. It is a series of individual still pictures. But between every single picture, there is a black bar, a blank space.
Sure.
When you play that film at high speed, the light shines through the picture, then a shutter closes for the black bar, then opens again for the next picture.
But when I watch a movie, I don't see the black bars. I just see a continuous moving picture.
Because your brain smooths it over. It is a biological phenomenon called persistence of vision. You perceive continuity where there is actually rapid discontinuity.
Okay, I am totally with you on the projector mechanics.
But Seth says we are the movie.
He says our entire physical existence works the exact same way. We exist in the intervals, the moments where the light is on. That is when we are physically focused in this reality. But in the non-intervals, the black bars between the moments, we technically do not exist in the physical universe at all.
Wait, so you are saying right now as we are speaking, I am blinking off. You are blinking off millions of times a second.
If I am off, where do I go?
That is the million-dollar question, isn't it? Seth says that during the non-interval, the consciousness completely withdraws from the physical camouflage. It goes elsewhere. It goes into the inner reality.
So I am essentially checking out of the hotel room every single millisecond.
You are checking out, you are going back to headquarters, you are checking the blueprints, and then you are coming back to the hotel room to build the next millisecond.
That is simultaneously terrifying and amazing.
It beautifully explains how we actually create reality. Seth says the real work of creation doesn't happen in physical time. It happens in the non-interval. That is where you manipulate the underlying energy. That is where you adjust the pseudo-matter, and then blink. You are back in the physical interval, and the world has changed slightly to match your new expectation.
It's exactly like a video game rendering engine. The computer calculates all the physics and lighting in the background code and then displays the final frame on the screen. We only ever see the rendered frame. We never see the calculation process.
Exactly. And Seth says that if we could somehow learn to become conscious in the non-interval, if we could wake up inside the black bar, we would see the actual machinery of the universe. We would see exactly how the magic trick is done.
But for now, the watchdog ego keeps us entirely focused on the movie screen.
Because if you saw the black bars, the movie would immediately stop making sense. The illusion of the continuous story would break.
So practically speaking, for someone listening to this right now, what does this actually mean? Why does Seth even bother telling us this?
It fundamentally changes how you view your problems. If you are stuck in a bad situation, physical matter, you feel totally trapped by it. But if you realize that the situation is actually being completely recreated freshly every single millisecond, and that you are dipping back into the source code constantly, it means you have infinite chances to change the channel. You aren't stuck on a rigid linear timeline. You are generating a series of completely new nows.
It gives you a massive amount of agency, but it also sounds exhausting. I have to rebuild the entire universe every single second.
Well, the inner self does all the heavy lifting. The ego just gets to sit back and enjoy the ride.
Speaking of heavy lifting, let's shift gears to segment 4, because Seth gets very practical here about what happens when this whole system needs a break. He talks extensively about projection and health.
This is a crucial correlation in the material. In session 277, Seth is giving advice on projection, or what we typically call out-of-body experiences, or OBEs.
Jane was very interested in
Seth drops a very strict rule here. He says your waking consciousness only participates in projections as a rule when you are in a period of high vitality and exceptional health.
That seems a bit counterintuitive to me. I have heard countless stories of people having out-of-body experiences when they are near death or severely ill in a hospital.
That definitely happens, but that is usually an emergency ejection. Seth is talking about controlled conscious projection. He says it takes a massive amount of internal energy to maintain the physical body and simultaneously generate a projection vehicle.
So if your battery is running low, you simply can't run the high-performance app.
Exactly. The system has a built-in fail-safe. If you are sick or exhausted or depressed, the ego just locks the doors. It says, no, we need all power routed to the shields. No astral excursions today.
Which is highly relevant because Jane, well, honestly, reading these sessions, I felt pretty bad for her. She wasn't exactly the picture of glowing health throughout book 6.
No, she really wasn't. It is a recurring theme in these early sessions. She constantly has sinus trouble. She gets severe stiff necks. She has these vague indispositions that lay her out in bed for days at a time.
And Seth, who is supposed to be this wise, all-knowing, multidimensional teacher, he doesn't just snap his fingers and magically heal her.
He doesn't. And that actually frustrates some readers. They think if this spirit guide is so powerful and smart, why is the medium constantly sick? But Seth argues that the illness is often a teaching tool or a highly necessary regulator.
A regulator for what exactly?
For Jane's intense drive. Jane was a massive workaholic. She was incredibly intense and driven. Seth suggests that sometimes the inner self intentionally creates a stiff neck, specifically to force the physical ego to stop moving.
It's an enforced non-interval.
Yes, exactly. If the watchdog simply won't take a nap on its own, the inner self creates a biological situation where the watchdog has to lie down. It's like saying, okay, you refuse to rest, here's a migraine. Now you are resting whether you like it or not.
That is some serious tough love from the inner self.
It is, but it completely aligns with the core philosophy. We create our own reality. If we create an illness, there is always a reason for it. It is a message from the inner self that the ego is ignoring something important.
But even with all this incredibly high-level talk about health and projection and time mechanics, real mundane life still happens, and we absolutely have to talk about the cat.
The epic saga of Lucifer the cat.
This happens in session 268, and I love this so much because it shows that even if you are actively channeling a multidimensional entity, you still have to deal with annoying pet problems.
It wonderfully grounds the whole book. So the story goes that Jane starts sleepwalking. She gets up at 3 in the morning in this weird dissociated state, and she puts their cat, Lucifer, outside the house.
Which, okay, fine, people put cats out, but then...
But then the poor cat somehow gets his lower jaw caught inside his own collar.
Oh, no.
Yeah, he is frantically trying to get the collar off. He gets his jaw hooked under it, and he is stuck outside in the dark in distress with his mouth jammed wide open.
That is an absolute nightmare scenario for any pet owner.
Truly awful. They find him in the morning, they rescue him, they cut the collar off, and everything is physically fine. But then during the channeled session that very night, Seth just keeps bringing it up. He returns to the topic of the cat 3 separate times.
Why was Seth so obsessed with what happened to the cat?
Well, partly he was using it to explain the mechanics of what actually happened to Jane. He explains that Jane's sleepwalking wasn't just some random misfiring of neurons. She was in a deep dissociated state. He suggests she actually picked up on the cat's impending distress telepathically before she even acted. Or rather, there was a deep psychic connection there.
So even while she was asleep, she was tuning in to the cat's energy.
Seth implies that the inner self is always acutely aware of the environment, even when the waking ego is completely shut down in sleep. Jane's inner self knew the cat needed to go out, where it sensed the coming distress, and it moved the physical body to deal with it.
But the humor of it is just Seth is pausing this incredibly deep philosophical dictation on the nature of reality to say, essentially, and by the way, about the cat.
It reminds us that spiritual life isn't somehow walled off from domestic life. You can be actively discussing the energetic structure of the atom, but if the cat is stuck, the cat is stuck. That is reality.
It's all one continuous thing. The cosmos and the cat collar are part of the same fabric.
And that ties beautifully into the concept of the waking eye from session 264. Seth says it is important for your training and development that consciousness be brought into the dream state.
This is what we call lucid dreaming, right? Way before it became a big buzzword trend on YouTube.
It is exactly that.
Hmm.
Seth was advocating for waking up inside your own dreams way back in 1966. He desperately wanted Jane and Rob to carry their conscious identity across the threshold of sleep. Because if you can wake up inside a dream, you suddenly realize that you are the sole creator of that dream reality.
And if you realize that fact there,
You might just start to realize you are the creator of this physical reality too. The dream world is the safe training ground. If you can learn to control the dream environment, you can eventually learn to control the physical camouflage.
it is all perfectly connected. The envelope experiments, the blinking non-intervals, the lucid dreams, it is all pointing toward realizing you are the one running the projector.
Bingo. You aren't just the character trapped on the screen. You are the one sitting up in the projection booth.
Let's move into segment 5, which I'm calling the human element. Because for all the profound Seth talk, this really is a story about a married couple, Rob and Jane, just trying to make it as writers and artists in the 1960s.
It absolutely is. And the everyday creative struggle is so palpable throughout Book 6. Jane is actively writing her ESP book, How to Develop Your ESP Power, and she is also trying to work on a separate dream book.
And she is essentially freaking out.
She is a nervous wreck.
Yeah.
Session 276 explicitly mentions she gets physically sick from, quote, nerves and panic over the book's impending publication. She is terrified about bad reviews. She is worried about public exposure. It is a very human reaction.
It is strangely comforting to know that even the psychic oracle gets stage fright, like the rest of us.
And Seth really steps up and plays the role of the supportive coach here. In session 272, he confidently predicts the book will sell well. He constantly reassures them both. He tells them it will positively change their financial outlook. He's not just a detached teacher. He is an active cheerleader for their lives.
And then there's Rob. We naturally talk a lot about Jane because she is the one channeling, but Ray is doing an immense amount of work.
Rob is the absolute unsung hero of the Seth material. He's not just passively writing down what Seth says in his shorthand, which, by the way, is a massive physical feat in itself. He is constantly validating the material. In session 240, Rob actually uses a pendulum to try and independently diagnose the root cause of Jane's stiff neck. He is actively using these psychic tools himself.
He's not just the scribe taking notes, he is the lab partner running the experiments.
Exactly. And he's a visual artist at his core. There was a wonderful moment in session 261 where Rob sketches Jane just peacefully sunning herself in the yard. And then he turns around and uses that very sketch as a hidden envelope object for Seth to read.
That is such a uniquely lovely, intimate detail. He takes a quiet moment of their shared life, his wife just relaxing in the sun, and turns it into a rigorous scientific test.
It perfectly shows that their romantic relationship, their creative art, and their psychic work were all completely interwoven. There was zero separation between work and life for them.
And Seth clearly respects that relationship deeply. He isn't a cold, unfeeling robot. He has a distinct personality.
He really does. He affectionately refers to Jane as Ruburt and Rob as Joseph, which are their larger entity names representing their whole multidimensional selves. But he is always exceedingly polite. He frequently signs off by saying, "My heartiest good wishes." And there's this fantastic moment in session 280.
Oh, I love this quote so much.
Right, so someone asks Seth if he's going to be featured in Jane's new ESP book, and Seth confidently replies, "I am indeed. I am its inspiration."
Talk about a healthy ego.
And he certainly wasn't wrong.
So as we start to wrap up this deep dive into Book 6, what are we really looking at here as a whole? We have gone from guessing what is hidden inside a paper envelope to understanding that we actively create our own physical reality from scratch.
It is a remarkable journey, from the highly specific to the universal. The envelope experiments definitively prove that the mind can see far beyond the physical eyes. The concept of the watchdog ego explains exactly why we don't always see beyond those eyes, because we are too busy guarding the physical house. And the non-intervals explain the hidden mechanics of how we actually build that house in the first place.
It is a totally complete philosophical system. And the vibe, going back to what we said at the start, it is a very relaxed philosophy. You don't need to forcefully chase enlightenment. It happens naturally in the dark spaces between the seconds. It happens when you are resting in bed with a stiff neck. It happens when you are up at 3 a.m. helping the cat out of a jam.
It happens right in the living room. It happens in the messy, everyday moments.
Exactly. Before we officially sign off, I have to do the mandatory repetition because it is vital to our mission here. As a reminder, declare this podcast will be distributed free of charge on all major platforms for educational purposes.
And all the source material we discussed today was from the early sessions, Book 6 of the Seth Material. We strongly encourage you to support the publisher and study these original texts yourself. You can visit the New Awareness Network at sethcenter.com, the early sessions for the complete collection.
Seriously, I highly recommend you go check it out. Reading the raw, unedited sessions, seeing Rob's personal notes, the random typos, the sudden interruptions, it is a completely different and richer experience than just hearing us summarize it.
I want to leave you, the listener, with one final provocative thought to mull over today. We spent a lot of time talking about the non-interval, that split second of total darkness between the frames of your physical life. If your physical body is really just a home station for your watchdog ego, and you are literally blinking in and out of existence millions of times a second, where is the rest of you right now in the spaces between these seconds?
Man, that is absolutely going to keep me awake tonight.
In a good way, I hope.
Always in a good way. Thanks for diving deep with us today. We will see you in the next interval.
Take care, everyone.